Hello, everyone. My name is John Hunt, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to this conversation that we're going to have um, about melanin and coils, looking at the ways in which we appearance, how we negotiate our bodies, how do we present ourselves, especially after the great achievement of becoming a republic in Barbados. And to introduce ourselves, I am John Hunt. I am a graduate of the Cultural Studies program here at the University of the West Indies, KFL campus. And with me is Bianca Mona, a PhD student, and Michelle Cox, um, an MPhil student, but we know that she'll become a PhD student very soon. And I'll give them a chance to introduce themselves and what their interests are, and then we'll get into our conversation. Who would like to start? Bianca?
Sure. I just want to say thank you for allowing me to participate in this conversation, and I'm looking forward to this exchange with my colleagues. My name is Bianca, and I'm originally from New York, Brooklyn, New York.
Nice.
And I too am a student at University West Indies Cave Hill getting a doctorate in cultural studies. My research interests are around Afro-Caribbean contemporary visual art production. I know that's a mouthful, but when we look at Caribbean art history, the narratives, the experiences, the stories of Black women, I think are missing. Although we've contributed and been producing contemporary artwork, we're active contributors to that field globally. So my dissertation project just tries to document some of the many stories of those art producers throughout the Caribbean diaspora.
Great. Thank you, Bianca. And Michelle, although you're no stranger to me, I believe that people might want to know who you are and what you're doing. So share with us.
Okay, so I'm Michelle. I think I'm in this conversation with several parts of myself. I'm here as a mother. I'm here as a teacher. I'm here as a cultural studies student. I coordinate the theater arts program at Barbados Community College, and I'm a playwright, storyteller, and mother of two boys. I think that's probably going to come up somewhere in this conversation, so it's important to say it up front. My research interests are representation and identity, particularly in context to Barbadian theater and writing in general. So that's kind of what I've been looking at over the last couple of years. Yeah, I'm definitely looking forward to this conversation with Bianca and John.
Thank you. So the whole concept of melanin and coils came out of an idea I believe that one of our undergrad students thought of when he was looking at how race and representation in the contemporary, how people still in this day and age are still being challenged about their appearance. So idea of melanin talking about race and representation, and coils, how their hair is being produced. And I remember as a very young person in Barbados having this situation come up when a person was refused a job in a bank because they choose to wear their hair as braids. And even in this particular time, I'm still hearing stories about people who are being targeted because they are dark skinned, their hair is not being presented in a way that is considered proper or natural, or not natural, but proper in that particular way. And I also think about the ways we embody our practice. So as from a performing arts perspective, I'm very curious as to the way we look at ourselves when we think about performance and performing the idea of what is acceptable in society. So maybe one of the ways we can start this conversation is to think about how do we address what is and isn't acceptable, and why is that? Are there any personal experiences that anybody want to share, or there's anything that they have observed about people's discrimination based on appearance, hair, skin, etc.?
Yeah, I grew up. I have many cousins, but I grew up particularly with two of my female cousins, who had this kind of thick, very curly, like I guess almost they're not mixed race, but the hair looks like they're mixed race. And long flowing hair and all of that. Um, and my hair clearly is not that. So I always grew up with this kind of desire to have hair like them because we went to the same school together. We're around time together, and everyone was always fussing about their hair and how lovely their hair was. Um, so you kind of, as a child, if you don't have somebody reinforcing your own sense of worth and beauty, you kind of grow up
Mm-hmm.
thinking, oh, their hair is nice and my hair is not, right? Hold on, please. Sorry, children.
Children.
So I grew up with that kind of comparison happening well into my teenage years. Um, and at the first chance I got, I straightened my hair because I wanted my hair to be long, but it was never like theirs, right? Um, and there is this kind of, I mean, I don't have anything against people who relax their hair. I mean, your hair is your hair. You do what you want to do with it, right? But for me, it was really more so an attempt to try to hear somebody say, you have beautiful hair, and a denial of the hair that I was actually born with. Um, so yeah, there's something in there, John. I think, when we look at it, this whole concept of what's acceptable and what's not, we have so many messages that are coming in and telling us what the beauty standard is, whether it's from mass media. And I mean, we talk about media a lot, but in my case, it didn't start with media, it started at home.
Mm-hmm.
So we have to look at those kinds of issues as well, because we get the messages all over. I mean, go for a job interview and your hair look one way and it ain't look too presentable. We're still in that mode of, that we still have a very colonial, I suppose, mindset. I'm still hearing stories from people talking about going for job interviews, for instance, in the hotel sector and being told that they have to cut their locks. That's still happening in 2022.
Yes. And Bianca, what would be your experience, living in New York and then coming into the Caribbean space?
Oh, I feel like it's such an unbalanced experience. Um, Brooklyn, Brooklyn has all these beautiful Black people that has the gamut of hair. We have quite a few of our own Black-owned businesses. We have our own festivals. There's just so much promotion
Mm-hmm.
in Brooklyn, in particular, around um, Black is beautiful,
Mm-hmm.
and the gamut of it, like all of it is beautiful and accepted in a way here. And the Carib coming to Barbados was a little bit of a shock,
Okay.
just because it's a Black nation, or what I categorize as a Black nation,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
where I would think that there would be more space and time to consider what the community and the culture wants, believes, thinks, and
Mm-hmm.
values. And so what I found was some of those conversations hadn't even taken place yet, and there was very much still old school thinking around acceptability and respectability
Mm-hmm.
politics. um, I also found in Barbados that some of that is governed by your social status, your
Mm-hmm.
educational background, so your gender, and it's a generational conversation and shift as well. So, for as much as I'll say that I was shocked, what I found on campus at UE was all this
Mm-hmm.
natural hair
Mm-hmm.
everywhere. Like, these 19, 20, 22 year olds the hair is just amazing. And I didn't find an abundance of weave, and I didn't find lots of perms. I found all this natural hair on campus. And so, what it really makes me think about are the generational shifts. It makes me think about the way that there's a particular generation that are exposed to ideas of blackness coming in from like all these different places in a way that maybe their grandparents didn't get that. I also feel like there's a spirit of this particular 1920. I don't know what that generation is. Gen Xers, Gen Zers, XYers. I don't know. But
Keep up. Can't keep up.
yeah, I can't keep up either. But they feel very like empowered to like make a mark, create their own destiny, and be expressive from head to toe, expression all the time. So I think in Barbados, it's interesting because depending on where you are in Barbados, depending on your age group, Huey was very different than like another area that I'm not going to call, but I'm just saying, it was a different experience.
Oh dear.
But being in Greater Barbados was like, oh, we still need to come to 2020. Let's meet at 2024. So like let's get there as a people. The other thing I'll say is, because I'm thinking about my childhood where there wasn't lots of hair care products. It was grease. It was grease and a perm. Like those were the options. And a hot comb. Like those are the things. And I think what we also find in the States is an explosion of hair care products that allows us to explore our natural hair a lot more. Like I kind of want to say in many ways, if you weren't born, so I was born in 80, but if you weren't born with the long curly mixed girl hair, what option did you have? There were
Anything
no
for you.
products on the market for us. So I think there's a parallel there happening with exploration of like hair care and how perhaps a place like New York is there already. But does Barbados have access to all of the products in the same way? And maybe that's part of the issue too, is you stop perming your hair or you cut it all off. What you do? What do you do with it?
Well, I mean, I think you've touched on some interesting points. The first thing I think about do, and of course, I'm not one to talk, given my hairstyle, but that it seems to be very gendered. So there is a way in which I think women are called to account in a different way than men are, and then the appearance then becomes even more regulated. So I have the experience of watching my niece, who is now 18, having to negotiate or navigate her way through her mother and her grandmother to wear a natural hair to school, because there's an assumption that she would be targeted if she did that. And of course, we have, like you said, the generation. She would have me as an uncle that would try to create space for her to have that. Then I hear of my colleagues or my friends who will go to like an event, and people would make it their business to come up to them and maybe assume that they're coming from a particular location and feel that they have the right to tell them where to sit or how to be, or to voice their opinion, which is usually derogatory in their direction. And I'm wondering, to the extent, how do we look at that? Because it seems to be a way in which Black women, and especially dark-skinned Black women, are targeted, or their appearance is regulated in a particular way, so that they have to shore up what people may presume about them based on how the society would normally look at them. And like you said, within a society that is supposed to be so advanced, that from the outside seems to be so progressive, when people come to the country, especially people who are coming from the North America or from Europe or from the UK, with their education and with their own experience of families leaving and coming back, that they are being targeted because for some reason they are not also fitting the paradigm of people who they're not fitting the paradigm of people who fit the bill of Barbadian, because they're not speaking in that Barbadian parlance, or they're not accepting of the location that people are presenting at them. So it'd be interesting to hear, as women now, how have you experienced that, and how have you been able to shift that, or how do you navigate those spaces?
I feel like, because I'm thinking about my own personal hair journey, and what I do remember that sticks with me to this day is my mother used to say to me, you have wiry hair, like you have hair like a piece of wire, so it won't curl up, but it doesn't get straight, and there's nothing we can do with it. So I'm gonna give you a perm.
No.
And so I had a perm, and I remember this. But I don't remember the year, but it was a summer, and I hadn't gone and gotten a touch up in many months. So it was this crazy mix of like 2 inches of like my natural hair, and then the ends were like broken off hair. There's this phrase my grandmother says that thing your hair can look like cats have been sucking on it. So it looked like 10 cats have been sucking on it. So I remember I was probably 11 or 12 or 13, and there was no option. Like I had to cut it off and start from scratch. So, there was this duality in my household of I didn't have good hair, but I did have the freedom to do what I wanted to do with my hair. And so cutting it off was acceptable, letting it be natural was acceptable, wanting to perm it. Like it was all kind of like you can do whatever you want to because it's yours. But just know you don't have the greatest hair. And so now I'm in my early 40s, and my mother said to me recently, "Your hair texture sure has changed. You can now do something with it." And I was just like, "What? Like, why do you?" Anyway, so I just feel like, my point being that it took me coming to like my own acceptance. It took me playing around with textures and colors and products. Um, it took me to grow into the hair texture I have because it is what it is. And it's not curly, and I can't wash it and go. Like I need to put a whole lot of something on it to keep a shape. So I don't know that I'm answering your question, but I'm just reflecting on that. I feel like it's a personal journey, really,
And
regardless
then
of what community you.
and then the decision that you take in terms of how you want to look and your appearance, it requires you to invest a certain time and energy, and I guess money into it. So yeah.
And
What
I
do
feel
Yeah,
what
like
would
that's the conversation. I'll say this real
yeah,
quick. When you talked about something being gendered, that's a part of the hair conversation that only women understand. Like only we understand the hours spent in between somebody's legs or in a chair, or the process, the many steps to hair. That's very gendered.
That's very gendered. Yes,
yeah. I've had a
Alicia.
similar kind of journey. But I cannot think of a time when anybody specifically told me I did not have, good hair or something like that. A lot of it was my own comparing to others. I could say, however, that there was a lot of not saying that I had good hair, like not saying anything. So no one went, "Oh, no, you don't have good hair," but they just went like, they're not saying. Um,
Silence.
that silence. And I think it's that lack of validation that then made me want to do the relaxer. And then I had the dry curl when that was in. I went through all these different phases. Um, and I was living in Trinidad. I think my hair was relaxed. And so everyone thought I was a Dougla because my features are, slightly Dougla-ish, apparently. Um, so then when I kind of came into myself, I was living in Trinidad, and I went, you know what? Yeah, I want my hair. I want my hair. And I cut my hair off, and then all of a sudden everybody was like, "Whoa, you're actually black."
Oh
Yes, I am.
dear. Oh dear. Yeah.
There was this
So
moment
it,
of recognition for them that I was
mm,
black because
mhm,
I cut my hair off, and you can see that there ain't no dougla in that hair, right? But I've been through, and a lot of my friends will probably tell you that I change my hair every 2 or 3 years. So the last set of changes have all been natural styles, but I've gone, like you said, Bianca, at one point it's like, cut it off. And then it might be, okay, I'll do braids. And then, like, this is my third set of locks, So I change my hair because my hair is a part of my expression. And there's sometimes when I'm just feeling like, yep, cut it off. That's where I want to be in that moment. And there are other times when I decide to commit to something like growing my mane, as my boys call it. But it is a gendered conversation. It definitely is. That whole thing of sitting down and cheese on bread, man, getting your hair braided is a task. I am not doing that no more. That is,
mhm.
ooh, takes too long. Don't have the time for that in my life these days. But it's a gendered conversation for women, but there's also that gendered conversation on the male side of it because, again, I'm a mother of boys. Um, my older boy, he when he started primary school, he had long hair. From birth, my husband and I said we were going to allow him to cut his hair when he wanted to cut his hair, so we'd never cut it. So he went into school with long hair and plaits, and we were told, right, so boys can't have long hair, he's got to cover it up with a tam. And we have to talk about that side of the gendering of the conversation about hair as well, because I
Mhm.
remember my son at 4 years old going to school with this tam on his head, being miserable and hot because the school is not properly ventilated. So, you're in there, you just want your head to be cool. His teacher used to let him sit by the fan to just cool down. But the girls in the class, they've got longer hair than he does and thicker hair in some cases, and they're like just sitting down. And my son goes, but mommy, why do I have to wear a tam and the girls don't have to wear a tam? And I can't answer that question intelligently. It makes no sense to me, right?
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
and one day I went to pick him up from school, and I saw this little boy who he's mixed race. His mother was white, his father was black, and he had hair that was very similar to my son. And his hair was pulled back in a ponytail, plait. All the front was like rusty and coming out, and he ain't had no hair covering on. So I
So
was
you're
like,
thinking, yeah. Mhm. Go
yeah,
ahead.
I went and I told the principal and the teacher, I said, listen, y'all told me that my son has to wear a tam, but this child ain't wearing none. I watched him for a week. He was not wearing a tam and no one told him anything. In fact, the teachers used to go like this and play with his hair. I said, right, so from next week, my son ain't wearing no tam neither. He ain't wearing it. And so my son started going to school without the tam. Eventually, he had locks. Um, and then at one point, he decided to take the locks out. And then he decided to cut the hair off. Now he's decided at 11 years old to grow his hair again. He's got long hair again. COVID. He's got 2 years of growth. And we're getting ready to go back into school. He's just started secondary school,
Mhm.
and we get a message from the principal saying, students are going to be coming back into school. This was last year's attempt to start school. Students are going to be coming back in, and we expect that everyone will be in full uniform, boys with their hair neatly cut.
Yeah, I've
I'm
heard
not
that
cutting my
story. So yeah, I've heard that story a lot, with especially with boys that you were saying who maybe because of the race they represent, they get a different treatment to other people, to other people who might represent other ethnicities or other races. It's very interesting. And I was also thinking about the maintenance that even men have to have when they do decide to have locks, because locks take a lot of maintenance. The natural in locks is not natural
Yeah.
at all. So, but it's not respected either. So I applaud people who have the ability to wear their hair and to grow their hair, because It is investing in your own appearance. So if we could take this conversation then to the macro level, because we have also representation of women and representation of appearance in our public spaces. So when you think about the Rihannas and our Prime Minister, Mia Motley, and other female politicians who in the last 3 years, I don't know if you know this, Bianca, have been presenting natural hairstyles in the public space. And we also
Marsha
had a
Cattle.
very Marsha Cattle. We also had a very important personality who decided, was during COVID also, that he would let his hair grow out. And at one point, it was a conversation on our local social media about Shane Jones's hair and what it represented. I'm seeing it looks kind of pulled in at the moment recently, but it was just out, and it was a wonderful crown, as I would say, because compared to me, I have no crown. But people had a whole conversation about a long conversation about if it was appropriate for media. What do we think about those representations when public figures take on that persona and make that part of how they present themselves in public spaces? You're going to answer it by not answering it. Yes, please.
Yes. Because I remember in St. Lucia, right? My details are a bit sketchy, so forgive me if I get something wrong. But St. Lucian Creole, yeah, was accepted at a point when politicians started using it in their parliaments and that kind of thing. When you see things being accepted at that level, the same thing with the arts. When you see the arts all of a sudden having, like, EBCCI now has degrees in arts. When you see things being accepted and promoted at a particular level, it's going to cause two things. One is conversation, and the other one, the one might be acceptance, but it causes that dialogue to start to happen. And I think we're kind of in that space now because we have a generation of people, young people at this point, who are challenging every single traditional norm that we've had for decades, right? Mia Motley and her hair. And I mean, the conversation was like, oh my God, she's going to be our prime minister? Really? With that hair? Yes, with that hair. What's wrong with that hair? There are several of us walking around with hair like that. Marsha Cattle wears hers beautifully, proud. And, when Shane started growing his hair, I sat and I watched it and I thought, okay, let's wait and see what's going to happen in the Barbadian public, because we have some people here who are just not going to have it. They ain't going to have it. Shane, you look like you're on the block. What's going on? But what is wrong with that? The hair grows out of your head. It belongs to you. And why are we trying to police the thing that belongs to us? The same thing with language. Why do we try to police our language? If you want to talk Bajan dialect, talk Bajan dialect. You want to wear your hair natural, wear your hair natural. Right? And I think we've got to come to a point where we stop hating ourselves. We stop hating the things that make us who we are, that identify us as a particular type of people, whether it's by virtue of our color or nationality, whatever. We need to stop hating ourselves. That's the truth.
Yes.
I
So
think that's what it comes down.
You are hitting on the mark of where we are uncomfortable, or we are still taking on that internalized sense of not accepting who we are or how we present ourselves. You were going to say something, Bianca, before.
Yeah, I'm gonna try to make a couple points concisely, but it reminds me of, well, first thing, John, you talked about, you referred to it as his crown, and I remember that conversation and being uncomfortable because I thought it was beautiful. Like in terms of my attraction to men, that's it. I want you to have a beard. I want you to have lots of hair. You can do what you want to with
Oh,
it, but
John, sorry, you missed out.
That, like, for me, that actually represents masculinity. I think men should be hairy, but that's neither here nor there. But it was sad and disappointing also because I consider journalists to be artists. And what I feel like we have the privilege of as being in the arts is we kind of set our own paths and do our own thing anyway. And so what I felt like, Bajans were asking him to do was to conform
Yeah, precisely.
in a standard similar to a banker. And it's like, yes, he's a presenter, but he's an artist. Journalism is a creative medium. TV media, it's all creative medium. So that took me back. But I thought the hair, I thought it was beautiful. I too looked at it like, a crown, and I thought he looked very regal, to be quite honest. But it also, Michelle's comments remind me of when I first arrived in Barbados and was introduced to a young lady who studied briefly in New York, but went back home to Barbados, and she was showing me around, and she talked about how she didn't like American blacks because we were loud,
Wow.
and like we made a scene everywhere we went. And I said to her, well, you can interpret that as, being uncouth, or you can interpret that as pride and being so self assured that you don't feel the need to censor yourself, or being so proud of who you are and where you're from that you're boastful and braggadocious about it. I was like, so that, there's two ways to look for it, but we're not we're not we're not a muted people. Even in Barbados, we're not a muted people.
No,
So
no.
it bothers me when we take that on, because I just don't think that's who we are.
Yes,
Yeah.
it definitely is something that we've taken on as a way of being accepted or passing, and I think that we set ourselves, we put ourselves at disadvantage, and we keep holding on to those things because we feel we have to conform to a norm, and that norm that we're conforming to is not even part of our the parts of ourselves that we are confident about. That's the parts of that have been put on us in order for us to survive our generations before. But it's unfortunate, and I think, when we think about that and we think about education systems, like Misha was alluding to, we have to be careful that we're not suppressing our children's creativity and expression by putting these restrictions on it because we think that's what good schooling is. Um, I often wonder if people really consider that making those kind of, I know the idea of school and the idea, there's an idea around everybody looking alike, but the looking alike seems to be looking alike. I said this in another forum, in a white, racist, upper class, highly educated, better located. We're trying to present this South that is not us, but we're trying to present it because we think it's going to make us acceptable in a global society. But that society has moved on. um, how do we then reclaim our intelligence and reclaim our identity as Barbadians or as Black people? That would be where I would like to see us. What kind of reforms would we want to see? In terms of our parents, for instance, or any part of our education system where we can look at these things like colorism and texturism and appearance, those things. Is it time to dismantle the whole idea of school uniforms? Although it has its utility, but there should be some way that people are allowed to express. How do we think about that? When we think about the creative expression and how people have various levels of intelligence and various ways of presenting themselves, and that confidence is an opener to spontaneous learning, but we suppress all of those at the root, from a very early age, from before they get to primary school, where we're already trying to get them to fit into this small sense of how they can learn or how they can express themselves. We really do our people I feel like we do our people a disservice. How do we change that paradigm? Or is that too big a
I
question?
think it's too big of a question, but I got some ideas. Um,
Good, good.
like uh, the conversation that we're engaged in the U.S. is around racial equity a lot, and equity is all about dismantling racist systems, right? And so I look, um, so I have a daughter too, but wasn't in she's not school age. She's 2, so she was like really in prim or a daycare. So I didn't have the experience of having a strict code around what she wore or how she presented herself. But I do remember engaging with Bayesian parents around the overall structure of the education system there. And
Mm-hmm.
it reinforces these ideas like the textbooks, the testing, the school selection, like all of that reinforces colonization. And it
Mm-hmm.
maintains these systems that don't allow Black people to question, analyze, aggravate the system. The other thing that I thought was interesting, although I know it's changing and I've seen pieces of it, going back to artists, like I often thought about like where's the murals? Where are the visible representations of unrest or injustice or I'm tired of this? And I feel like historically Barbados has muted those things so that people don't question. And I if you can remove the visual elements that maybe awaken a consciousness, then people aren't going to question.
Mm-hmm.
And then my third point is patronage. And so the little bit I know about Barbados, because I'm not a Bayesian historian, is that, it's what it feels like to me, and I hope I don't get in hot water saying this, is it's still very much a British playground. And so they come there, buy up property, start businesses. They're the patrons of the country in many ways. And so, it goes back to equity and systems. If we stop that, if we don't let foreigners not buy property, or you have to start a business with a Bayesian citizen, then, that changes the conversation. When the power changes and the money changes hands, then there's opportunity to reconsider who we are as Black people in the world.
Mm-hmm. But that would require a courageous government to create those kind of policies that set the shift in the dynamic. Part of our issue is that as a former colony, we farmed out our resources, our people. I think 85% goes out. Are we in a position to say, okay, let's shift that paradigm so that you would have to engage with local artists or with local audiences or with local business people to bring business here? Are we courageous enough to do that? That's very interesting.
Yeah, there are a lot of questions to be asked. I mean, as parent and teacher, I'm sitting square in that whole conversation about educational reform. And we can't get the little stuff done. Tiny little things. Can't get it done.
Mm-hmm.
We should not be in 2022 having a conversation about hair. We're not supposed to be having this conversation in 2022,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
right? And for some reason, we have a knack of, exactly what Bianca is saying, to be honest. We hold on to these kind of colonial, archaic standards that the colonial masters let go of already. you know, and that's the part that always gets me. They've let go of it. When I was living in the UK, I saw people, boys and girls, going to school. Their hair was all kinds of different styles. Some of the boys had plaits, some of them had it open and flying. And I'm like, wait a minute, why are we still having this conversation in Barbados where we are a majority Black country and we can't even embrace our Blackness? We hold on to it, and we seem to think that those very archaic colonial racist standards, we seem to hold them on some kind of a pedestal and think that that is what we are supposed to kind of reach for. And it's unfortunate. I don't know how to change it at the level of primary and secondary school. I know that because I teach at tertiary, so there's a lot more freedom of expression in that environment. And one of the things that I will always tell my students is, do what you want, do with your hair. Only thing is, because we teach theater, you need to let me know first, because if you're doing a production, then your hair will work within the context of the production that we're
Mm-hmm.
doing. And in some cases, we will tell them, like I had a particular student who was forever changing her hair, and she changed the hair color, the hairstyle, everything. And I said to her, look, this is who you are. This is a part of your identity, right? That's cool. When we have a production, let me know what you're planning to do with your hair. I'll tell you what we want for your character, and we negotiate and we come to an agreement together. I suppose a lot of other directors don't necessarily do that because what I want for my character is what you have to give me. I tend to be more of a negotiator as a director, right? Because I find that especially at that age, I'm teaching them when they're like 16, fresh out of secondary school, and they're trying to find themselves. And I remember what it was like at 16 when I was trying to figure out this new space called college where I had so many new freedoms. And it's a space where you can explore yourself so much more. And I don't want to restrict that. Find yourself, explore yourself, love yourself for who you are, and play with the hair, man. Go right ahead. But it is unfortunate that we're still stuck in that kind of colonial mentality.
And I think one of the things that Bianca mentioned that is very pertinent is not only the way in which you, Bianca, may feel like you may not know enough about Beijing history. You'll be amazed because I like Michelle teaching the tertiary system. A lot of students that come into our classes do not have a sense of their history. They don't have a sense of what their ancestors went through. It's almost as if it's been erased from their. They don't understand the relevance of why we are doing it, and then it becomes like a
Yeah.
schism for them when we share it with them. And I think that there is a way in which people are hungry to know about themselves, but it is the way in which ignorance in that particular way is used to regulate and control. So that's why in my more provocative moments, I talk about the school system being a conditioning space, like when we talk about disciplinary spaces like
Yeah.
prison, we actually regulate by withholding certain information from them. And not only that, we have generations of people who don't want to talk about the unbearable, uncomfortable things about our past. They don't want to talk about slavery. They don't want to talk about the fight towards colonialism. They don't want to talk about the riots. They don't want to talk about the sacrifices that our ancestors made so that we could be here. Because they think that by doing so, they will put us in line to be victimized. But what it actually does, it keeps us in that place of subjugation. So it is this place where you know, we are in the process of not sharing that information, not giving the people a chance to identify with or even represent who they are, because what we then feed them with is a steady diet of American television, right, where everybody is like complected or straight haired and speaking in a particular way, and then the idea of standard English being something that is prevalent. So we're not even understanding that there's a time and place to show where and when we can be who and how we want to be. So we have really denied the opportunity to really talk about identity and when one can show up as who you want to be in the time. So I think those conversations, because they're missing from our education system, then they become missing from our life, and we keep having this fight, and it shows up in the way we show ourselves, and it shows up in the way people talk about hair and our hair stories. Um, we
But
like I
John, it's
think
also nothing new.
it's nothing
It's
new.
not, because if you think about the 60s and 70s, when the afro was in, and it was a sign of rebellion and resistance at one point. And I know people used to, yes, you thought about the afro, the bigger the afro, you were more kind of like kingly or queenly. But then there were those who opposed this idea of this black hair on top of your head. So it isn't new what we're going through. And I think sometimes we tend to forget the struggles that we might have had when we were younger. We forget.
Well, there is that, and then there's the moment where, okay, that's good for you to express yourself, you know, as you're a young person, but now you gotta settle down, you gotta calm down, you gotta bring it down. So I think that we're still in that dance about when and where is it okay to be who you are and still function in society. So when we start to see more bankers or more people in higher aspects of our community being themselves and not having to do that dance, to follow that very narrow conservative appearance. I think that's when we're gonna see a shift. There was a time we could, like, you would see dashikis and those kind of shirts in Parliament. I'm not seeing them now. We're all about the power suits, the almost too tight power suits, and we're almost about fitting our big bodies into these small clothes, or and if that's what you want to do because you're expressing yourself, that's fine. But what is that saying about you as a people whose ancestors were part of an enslaved system? I don't think we're ready yet to talk about that, and that's why we're having this struggle. So
I also just I want to add to that because I feel like poverty people are allergic to poverty, and so anything that puts them in that economic bracket or their perception of that economic bracket, they're
Yeah.
like trying to like flee away from. Like I got my education, I got my car, I got my house. There's no way I can look like that now because I'm not poor. And I think that's part of the perception of or not understanding systematic poverty or generational poverty. There's a rationale and a reason why, especially in Black nations where resources have been taken and continue to be taken and not distributed,
Yeah.
equally. So I feel like that's part of the conversation too. You don't want to be poor, then you're not going to grow your hair out.
Right, you're not gonna try to do anything that looks like that. And
Very
at the
good
end of the
point.
day, we are looking at that place where we haven't addressed, like you said, our history and our sense of ourselves in that space. And this is a conversation that will continue. So I don't know if there are any final thoughts you want to share with us, anything that you want us to think about going forward. Certainly, it'll be good to applaud those who do stand out and do show themselves in the way that they want to show themselves, however they want to show themselves, and to really work towards looking at us, looking at what we have achieved in spite of the challenges we've come through, as a way of celebrating ourselves. That might begin the shift. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think just recognizing that how you grow or wear your hair does not actually, I mean, I know it grows out of your head, but it doesn't actually affect your brain, So you're not less or more capable of doing any particular task because of the hair that you have or don't have, as the case may be. And when we get to a point where we begin to understand and appreciate and love what we have, we may begin to see that change coming in slowly, but it does take. And I mean, I hope we're at this point. I think we're kind of getting to that point of changing because it is in our face so much more often. Through people like Mia Motley, through the Shane Jones or the Marsha Caddles, the
The
Speaker
performing
of the House,
artists.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, artists were always those rebellious people, anyhow. But but we're beginning to see people in authority embracing this element of themselves, and I'm hoping that that is going to signal a change in how we begin. And you know what? At some point, the younger people who are in this space right now, going, "No, this is me," they're going to be the older generation, and I hope that they continue with that self affirmation for the generations to come.
Right.
Yeah, I
Right.
just want to echo that comment that oftentimes the youth are smarter, wiser, more determined, less bitter than the older folks in our communities. And I think there's lessons to be learned. I think it's important to watch them and listen to them and allow them to express themselves and maybe follow their lead occasionally.
Yeah. I like that. I like the idea of following the lead, and I also like the idea of backing them, because sometimes they have to deal with what we dealt with, right? Where we had these adults that would talk down to us, and there's nothing more transformative than telling somebody to hold up. This person hasn't been hurt the way we have. They're a little further along this whole route than we have, so they are not living a life based on any fear or any discouragement that we would have experienced. Let's follow their lead. So I want to thank you for this conversation. I want to thank you for being with us. I know that there are many other activities happening during this week of of conversations. So please look forward for more.